We arrived at the ruins when the sun was already setting. Igor deliberately lingered and brought his friends here closer to dusk in order to enhance the effect and prove to Tanya that this place is much more mysterious and scary than the abandoned school she insisted on. Igor led a channel on YouTube with the beautiful name Anomaly and, together with a small team of like-minded people, ransacked abandoned places in search of these very anomalies. But the main trick was not only in the exciting reviews of former psychiatric hospitals, cemeteries, hospitals, schools, and so on. His girlfriend Tatiana had a violent imagination and easily composed horror stories about ghosts, the dead, murderers and other terrible inhabitants of our and the other world. Reviews of abandoned places, coupled with scary stories written about these very places, were a success. The channel quickly gained popularity, gained a large number of subscribers, and a team of bloggers, stalkers, with even greater diligence, was looking for new interesting and creepy buildings. Usually, disagreements between friends arose rarely, but today Tanya became stubborn. Halloween was approaching and she already had a plot ready on the subject. It was only necessary to find a suitable location and Tanya found the old school. And Igor came across pictures of a terrible monastery on the internet, caught fire with this idea and incited the team to go to the ruins. At first, Tanya grumbled that the idea with the monastery was bad and she didn't have a single thought in her head about it. But when she arrived, she changed her mind. In the rays of the setting sun, the ruins looked majestic and creepy at the same time. The former monastery was located far enough from the nearest settlement, and it was clear that curious noses did not particularly poke their noses here. The yard was overgrown with tall weeds and there were no traces of civilization like empty cans, bottles, wrappers and other garbage. Dennis pulled out the things necessary for shooting from the trunk, and a small company headed for the entrance. Inside the monastery was just as gloomy and unfriendly. Gray, moss-covered walls gloomily propped up the dilapidated vaults. Strange, because it would seem sacred, but I want to leave it as soon as possible. Olesya screamed when suddenly a bat flew right in front of her, disturbed by loud voices. Apparently, owls and bats were now the absolute masters of this sad temple. Only the young grass was pleasing to the eye, stubbornly making its way through the piles of stones. Life and death, as always, went hand in hand. Dull, cramped cells, where long ago lived people who connected their path with God, looked at unexpected guests with empty eye sockets of broken windows. Even during the prosperity of the monastery, it was hard to live here. And why torture yourself like that? Is it really impossible to serve God without godly torture? Who even said that he needed this sacrifice? Tanya thought, standing in one dilapidated cell. Igor and Dennis were setting up the equipment, cheerfully calling to Olesya. Tanya took several pictures, which, in her opinion, were quite suitable for illustrating the story. What exactly she will write about this time, the girl has not yet decided. Thinking, she went to the small window of the cell and took another picture, but almost dropped the phone. Pointing the camera at the window, Tanya saw on the screen the silhouette of a girl hanging in the air, or rather, a hanged girl. Tanya could not hold back the cry, and naturally her friends immediately rushed over. Having learned what happened, Igor was delighted. I told you that you need to go here. Now let's make a stunning release. Everyone will squeal with delight. But where did the ghost go? Hey, where are you? Olesya showed with her eyes, behind. And, turning around, the friends saw a girl in ancient clothes. Long hair spilled over her shoulders. In the gathering twilight, the white dress stood out as a bright spot. The face was also white as paper, and therefore, probably, the eyes seemed unnaturally dark and eerie, like two bottomless wells. But the worst thing was that a piece of rope dangled around the girl's neck. For a minute everyone froze in a daze, silently looking at the stranger. The ghost, meanwhile, beckoned them with his hand and floated through the air, heading deeper into the ruins. Igor was the first to come to his senses and nudged Dennis with his elbow, whispering softly, "Shoot faster." He nodded, turning on the camera. However, no one dared to go after the deceased until the girl called them again, making signs with her hands and shaking her head impatiently. Igor gathered his courage first. Still, he brought friends here and it was a shame to celebrate a coward. He followed the ghost, and the others filed after him. The ghost led them on and on until it came to a dead end against a stone wall. There was no further progress. The girl pointed her finger at the wall and disappeared, passing through it. It was obvious that the deceased wanted to show them something, but where did she go? Dennis shone his flashlight, but found no door, no window, and no other hole. The wall was completely smooth. "Strange," Tanya whispered, but then slapped her forehead. "Of course. There must be some sort of lever that opens the door. It's a secret hole." She grabbed the flashlight from Dennis's hands and began to carefully examine the surface. "Most likely it is a wall candlestick." Tanya grabbed him, tried to turn in different directions and she succeeded. A gap formed in the wall. The girl pressed harder, and the well-camouflaged door opened. Behind the door was a staircase leading somewhere down, apparently to the basement. "Let's go?" Tanya asked hesitantly. Friends silently nodded in response. It was scary to go, but curiosity overcame. What if they find a treasure there? Gold or something like that? Slowly, one after another, the friends descended into the dungeon of the monastery. No. There was no gold there. A terrible find awaited them in one of the gloomy, damp rooms of the huge basement. There lay a female skeleton in decayed clothes. The girls screamed, hugging each other. Igor and Dennis also could not resist the frightened exclamations. "Damn! What is this?" A quiet voice came from behind, making the friends almost jump in place in horror. The girl who brought them here stood at the door of the room and pointed to the skeleton. She spoke, "Do not be afraid of me. I won't hurt you. Quite the contrary. I am very thankful. Now the cursed monk has lost his power over me." Seeing our bewilderment, she sighed. "I will tell you my sad story. My name was Maria. I was born and raised in a wealthy merchant family. My father was a cheerful, generous man. On holidays, guests, the house is full, festivities, songs, gypsies. He spoiled me mercilessly. The best dresses, governesses. Yes, so that they brought up no worse than a noblewoman. And mother, on the contrary, was a modest, very pious, and strict woman. From an early age, I traveled with her to churches and monasteries. Matushka did her best to subdue her pride, donated a lot of money to churches, and especially fell in love with this monastery. The abbot in it was Father John, famous for his merciless severity and piety. He brought the monks almost to the point of complete exhaustion. Constant prayers, poor food, hard work, cold cells. A gloomy, dull place, more like hard labor. It seemed to me that the abbot simply loves to torture people, and I was not mistaken. But for some reason, Mother liked to come here during the days of Great Lent. She bowed before Father John, considering him almost a saint. When I grew up, my mother began to bring me to cleanse my soul. Those were the hardest days of my life. Spoiled by my father, I am not accustomed to coarse food, to thin blankets that do not protect from the cold. And Father John inspired indescribable horror on me, especially his strange look, as if feeling me from head to toe. Even from a distance, without turning around, I felt this look with my skin and tried to disappear somewhere. Thank the Lord that my mother rarely came here. The last, fateful visit took place before my engagement. The young merchant wooed me. Our fathers were friends and were happy to marry their children, and to combine capitals. The bridegroom was not stupid, good-looking and good-natured. On the eve of my betrothal, it occurred to my mother to send me to a monastery in order to receive Father John's blessing. No matter how I tried to persuade her to go after the wedding, her mother did not agree. My heart sank from a bad premonition, but I did not dare to contradict her will and went to the monastery. Mother, due to a severe migraine, could not go with me. I arrived there in the evening, went to my cell, after praying and putting on a thin monastic shirt, lay down in a hard bed, shivering from cold and fear. The miserable stub of the candle illuminated the cell with a dim light. For some reason, the faces of the saints seemed to me unnaturally alive and creepy. An owl hooted outside the window. My heart suddenly beat so loudly and so fast, as if it wanted to jump out of my chest. I made the sign of the cross and approached the icon. Then steps were heard in the corridor. Someone stopped at the door of my cell, stood for a minute, as if thinking, and the door opened. It was the abbot. I looked at him with fear and bewilderment. What does he need at this hour? He approached, breathing heavily and not taking his terrible eyes off me. I was petrified with fear. He muttered something, holding out his hands to me. I came to my senses and wanted to run out of the cell, but he stood in the way. And then the worst happened. The girl lowered her head and was silent for several seconds. Then, with a great effort of will, she forced herself to continue. The abbot grabbed me, covered my mouth with his hand and knocked me over on the bed. Trembling with horror, I tried to resist, but my strength quickly left. He squeezed me so that my breath caught, and then a terrible pain pierced my body. There is no more strength left. In the end, a saving swoon enveloped me with its dark veil. I woke up before dawn, at first not even realizing where I was. The head was like on fire. How much time passed in unconsciousness, I did not know. But suddenly I remembered the terrible misfortune that happened to me, and got up, overcoming weakness and pain. You need to quickly escape from the robber's lair. I began frantically pulling on my clothes when the door opened again and my tormentor appeared. I cowered in fear and huddled in a corner, trembling and crying. He stepped closer, grabbed my chin and forced me to look into his eyes. And when I started talking, I realized that the abuse of my body was not the worst thing that happened today. Every word of the scoundrel echoed in the soul with the death knell. I fell into a trap from which there was no way out. I hope, Maria, you understand that after today's event you will no longer return home? Event. So he called his crime. And the executioner, meanwhile, continued, not paying attention to my condition. No wedding, of course, will not. You're devout. He emphasized this word, grinning vilely. Mother will be horrified and indignant when she learns that her daughter has sinned with one of our monks, whom I, of course, will roughly punish for sin. To avoid disgrace, you will be given to a convent. The rest of your fate is in your own hands. The abbess of the convent that I will recommend to your parents is a faithful person. If you submit to me, I will pick you up and take you to my estate, which is not very far from here. You will live in abundance, you will not need anything, and I will often visit you. If you resist, you will rot in the monastery. The conditions there are unsuitable for a young lady, and the mother abbess especially torments the libertines. So choose, either live with me or die. The scoundrel left the cell, and in despair I fell on my knees in front of the icon and began to earnestly pray that the Lord would save me from such a terrible fate. Was I a great sinner? Did she deserve such a punishment? Pictures of the future appeared before my eyes, one more terrible than the other. Nobody will believe me. What does my word mean? Against the abbot of the monastery, who has great power. Nobody will save me. I died. He said that there are only two ways, but he was wrong. There is a third way. Think. Don't lose your soul. God does not send a test to a person that he is not able to endure, the mind repeated, but the heart suggested otherwise. I will not endure these tortures and humiliations. I am afraid of a painful, slow death. Better get it over with this time. I quickly tore the sheet, made a rope, pulled a stool to the window and stood on it. The first rooster crowed. Now the monastery will wake up. It's time. I put the rope around my neck and took a step forward. Everyone listened to the deceased with horror and pity at the same time. Olesya and Tanya were crying. The girl was silent for another minute. It was evident that these memories are very heavy for her. When the villain discovered my body, he hid it in the basement, hiding the traces of the crime, and told his parents that I had escaped from the monastery at night. No one even thought of suspecting the pious abbot of kidnapping or any other crime. They searched for me for many years, but they never found me. It was a hard blow for my parents. 5 years later, my father died of anguish, and my mother ended her days in a monastery. After the death of her father, she gave away her fortune to churches and orphanages and went to the purest monastery to live out her life in tears and prayers. So, the atrocity was hidden from human eyes, but not from God. When Father John's death hour came, the monks who entered the cell were numb with fear. The abbot was lying on the floor, clutching his throat with both hands. His eyes were wide open. His mouth was twisted. All icons and crosses were thrown to the floor. On many icons, the saints had no eyes. Someone was poking the canvases with a knife with great fury. Even wooden icons were slashed up and down. People then said that he sold his soul to Satan. And so it was. Both of us are restless, the executioner and the victim. And after death, he tormented me for many years, but no longer has power over my soul or body. Finally, I will find peace.